All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Noah and Dr. Michael, for being here. As you know, I'm a big supporter of Supreme Nutrition. I started using your products personally because I have Lyme disease and I had a mold exposure, and I ran into Takasumi. And so I have been using that off and on for my personal health, and then of course recommending that to all of my clients. So I'm honored to have you, and I would love to hear what it is about your brand that makes you unique.
You know, the company started a while ago. My practice involved treating a lot of people that were chemically sensitive, different forms of environmental illness. And, you know, most of the brands on the market have used, you know, many different things added into the capsule, for instance. So for instance, if you have, you know, say a vitamin, and the vitamin is 30 milligrams, it's a 200 milligram capsule. So you have 170 milligrams of extra space, you have to put something in. You know, some companies will use different things to add that make manufacturing quicker and more efficient, but it might decrease absorption, or you might have a reaction to it. For instance, stearic acid, magnesium stearate are two ingredients that act as lubricants in the manufacturing process, but because they are a saturated fat that coats the active ingredients, you might not get good dissolution in the stomach. You might get decreased absorption. So we decided a long time ago, after working for many years with a company that was pretty clean, that we wanted to see if we could encapsulate things with only the raw materials and nothing else. And we searched all over the country. We found a couple of, I think, 2 companies that would work with us to do that. Again, from their standpoint, the manufacturing goes a lot slower, so it ends up costing more. But again, the product ends up working better a lot of the time. The other things that we do are beside the typical COA, the certificate of
Analysis.
Which will tell you, are there certain heavy metals, what's the bacteria count, what's the fungal count. I mean, all companies have to go through that as long as they manufacture in a GMP, a good manufacturing practices facility like we do. But we take it a step further, and we do some in-house testing, both energetically and also on our patients, to see, does the product actually perform? You know, because a product might meet all the expectations in terms of bacterial count, fungal count, et cetera, but it might not just be vital enough, you know, or maybe they grew it next door to a beryllium manufacturing plant. Beryllium is not one of the things they check for. You just don't know. So it has to, I'm the quality control, the main quality control person. So I get all the raw materials. Most of the time we'll get multiple ones of a particular herb. I'll be blinded when I test, and I'll test it on various patients, and I'll say, this is the one we're getting, you know, not based on price, but just based on efficacy. So that's kind of unique. Another thing we like to do is we like to mainly use single herbs as opposed to combinations. So let's say you felt like you wanted to do a parasite cleanse or something like that. You know, you go to the store and you'll buy something and it'll have 20 different ingredients in it.
Right.
Maybe for your particular self, 3 of those ingredients might be the right ones. Maybe 10 of them are just irrelevant for you. You know, they're not going to hurt you. They're not going to help. And then there might be a couple that are detrimental, because any herbs that are strong enough to kill parasites, if you don't need them, they could be inflammatory in you. So if you take all of that, it might work, it might not. Oftentimes the person taking it might feel bad for a few days, and sometimes it could be die-off, but a lot of times it's just that they're reacting negatively to the supplement and they just think it's a good thing when it's really not. So we have more. So for instance, for parasites, we might have single herbs. We'll have Malia Supreme and Vedanga Supreme and Mimosa Supreme and Golden Thread Supreme and probably some others I'm not thinking of at the moment. And that way, if another problem with the 20 is there's so little of each ingredient in there that if your body only needs 2 or 3, you're not going to get a therapeutic amount. So this way you could pick, 2 or 3 or 1 that seems to match your symptom picture the best. And by taking it as a single herb or maybe mixing it and matching it with one other, you'll be getting therapeutic dosages so it can actually do the job in a relatively quick amount of time.
I mean, that seems to make sense. And especially going back to what you said about the magnesium stearate and, other excipients that might be used in other products. I've been a lifelong sufferer, unfortunately, with this irritable, gut, IBS type of leaky gut. And now more and more, we're seeing how the gut is tied to the brain. And so if we are taking all these supplements that are supposed to help us, but they have these other agents in them that are also causing inflammation, then we know that that's going to precipitate and keep that cycle of disease going in the gut as well as the brain.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. The idea of the single herbs, and I ran into that a lot. So I started my career in natural health at working at a supplement store. And one of my biggest frustrations was that I was very science-based and I would see these formulas like you're talking about with, 12 different herbs. And I would look at the studies and the doses that they were using in those formulas were so low compared to what was mentioned in the studies. And so, I quickly transitioned to the more professional supplements. But even then, when we see professional lines, we sometimes see these smattering of herbs across the board, and they may or may not be at therapeutic doses.
And also, as a naturalist, if you look at animals in the wild, if they get sick, they may gravitate toward taking a particular plant that they only eat at that time. You don't see them running and getting 12 different plants and mixing them together and doing something like that.
That's very true.
Also,
Very
we like
true.
to use whole herbs versus extracts. And, if you do an extract, the first thing is, what are they extracting it with?
Mhm.
Unless you have alcohol that's organic, it's most likely GMO corn ethanol. So that's
Okay.
one thing to consider. But when you do an extract, it's removing certain aspects and strengthening them, but then weakening other aspects. And we kind of look like in nature there's a good synergy in plants. And when you change those ratios, you lose the synergy that's natural. And like one of our products, Camu, which is one of my absolute favorites for immune boosting. It's the second highest natural source of vitamin C in the world. The only thing higher is something that you can't get grown in the wild in Australia. And it has a lot of vitamin C in it, but if you look at it compared to like an ascorbic acid supplement, it's way less than you're actually going to be getting in an ascorbic acid supplement. But generally, symptomatically with patients, we see it works much better because it's not an extra, it's not just ascorbic acid. It has all of the cofactors and everything in it. And the same thing happens when you do extracts with herbs. You change the ratios, and I think you lose synergy a lot of the time.
Yeah, I remember being in nutrition school, studying nutrition, and we talked a lot about the synergy of whole foods, right? And so you guys are providing herbs in their whole food form. So that's great. So I wanted to kind of maybe pick your brain about viral infections. That's a hot topic for everybody. It used to be that we only talked about that during the winter or cold and flu season, but now it seems like it's an everyday thing. And I'd love to get your take on either prevention or responsible treatment, whether that's with a practitioner or using your own home remedies.
Obviously there are lifestyle things, in terms of not eating any junk. That's probably the most,
Amen.
obvious thing. Just whole foods. And again, you can't specifically say one diet because, one person might need a little bit, higher percentage of carbs in their diet, and one person might need to be grain-free, but, figuring out your right diet, getting out in the sun as much as possible, because UV is very antimicrobial, and don't necessarily cover your whole body with lotions and things that'll block the UV from entering. Getting to bed early is incredibly important because things like melatonin have antimicrobial and immune modulating properties. And you end up with much more production during your sleep time before midnight. And I think ideally we were programmed to, which we're not going to do exactly, but getting dark is kind of a signal that it's time to kind of wrap up the day.
Yeah.
So I think there are obvious lifestyle things that are super important. No, you want to talk about the herbs a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes, you obviously have different things. You have the common cold, you have more influenza, you have what's going on lately. In terms of general immune boosting, let's just talk about, if people want to take stuff throughout the year, throughout, like, let's say the winter season. Like my dad mentioned, in terms of lifestyle factors, you do have the things like eating some raw garlic or eating some raw onions for the natural properties of that. They actually found raw garlic works way better than powdered garlic in terms of fighting off viruses. So you have those aspects. Camu, which I mentioned, it's one of my absolute favorites for prevention, and also if someone comes down with something. If I'm traveling, there's a lot of colds going around, that type of thing, I'll usually take anywhere, honestly, between 2 and 6 Camu pills a day. And I just feel like it gives myself a good immune system boost. And like I said, that can be if you're around a lot of people that are ill, or if you're traveling or going under a high stress area, just because you have the vitamin C, bioflavonoids, all the other cofactors, it works really well. And they've also found Camu has good antiviral and antiretroviral properties if you look at the research, which is really interesting.
The one thing about immune system and herbs, what we keep on hand, like in our personal medicine cabinets, might vary depending on, say, someone, like, for instance, Camu would be wonderful for everybody, but if you take something like reishi and astragalus, they would be great products if you tend to be one of those persons who leans more toward getting sick a lot. But if you tend to be more the autoimmune type, like I am, where your body's continually fighting everything, those products might not be, I think Camu would still be great, but astragalus and reishi might not be the best. You might want to go with Elysium and golden thread and Malia and andrographis and so forth, because they will be a very good antimicrobial, but they will actually, one, be more broad spectrum, so they'll also work against funguses and bacteria, and they're not going to ramp up an immune system in a negative way for people that have autoimmune reactions.
And then for those people that are, continually stressed a lot, something like American ginseng could actually be very good, because not only is it a great adrenal adaptogen, they've done a lot of studies showing how taking it, the research has shown it actually decreases the chances of you getting a cold. And if you do, decrease the duration. It's kind of, one of those things about, when I think ginseng, I think adrenals, but it has so many different properties, and it's really good for the common cold in that way. And my dad mentioned Elysium, which, during the flu season, Camu and Elysium are my two favorite products by far. If someone feels like they're coming down with the flu, like I said, usually just kind of day to day, I might have people take between 2 and 6 Camu pills. I'll have people take between 16 and 20 a day if they feel like they're coming down with the flu, and tag team that with Elysium, which is star anise. Elysium has shikimic acid in, which is actually the precursor for what they make Tamiflu from. I believe it's like 70 or 80, I could be wrong in those numbers, % of the star anise crop in the world goes towards Tamiflu production. Wow. And, for a lot of more kind of general prevention, we might have people take Elysium 1 to 3 a day. If people feel like they're coming down with the flu, a lot of them, I'll have them take 3 pills 3 times a day. And, we're just trying to boost the body's immune system, help what their body can naturally do. And I've had more people than I can count tell me that they thought they were coming down with the flu, but they didn't come down with it, or this is the best quote unquote flu they've ever had, and basically just help them fight it off. And some people, there's other herbs that are great for antiviral, like woad, which is isatis. Some people do well in that, but Elysium and Camu are my by far favorite during influenza
one
season.
thing that would fit with Camu that wouldn't really hurt autoimmune people would be Morinda.
Yeah.
Because we've had a lot of people take Morinda prophylactically and they just don't get sick like they used to. You know, the frequency goes way, way down.
And, you know,
sorry. I was just going to ask you if you guys recommend the powdered camu, the powder form, or do you stick with the pills?
Well, we personally used to have a powdered form and it worked great. I mean, we used to taste test all different types of camus. At one point, I probably got 20 different ones in to try. And for some reason, our camu source tasted great. Every other camu source tasted like dirt. I don't know why, it just tasted disgusting. And then our supplier kept getting it from the same farm, but it started to taste like dirt. And that's why we ended up encapsulating it. It still works just as well, if not slightly better.
Yeah.
But because of the taste, we had so many complaints, so we just do it. And one thing you do have to be careful with a lot of camu, there's a lot of camu out there. Like if you just buy a bag in the store, it's camu juice, which is spray dried on maltodextrin. And they don't always have to put that on the label because of the processing agent and labeling laws.
So if your camu tastes good or is bright in color, the chances are it's sprayed on maltodextrin.
Yeah, that's suspicious.
Also, if it's in a powder form, a lot of the times too, they'll add in silicon dioxide or lower amounts of maltodextrin. And again, they don't have, or rice flour. They don't always have to list that just to keep it from clumping because of the texture of the powder. It very easily clumps.
When we had it in a powdered form, you know, if you didn't open the jar for like 3 months and you opened it up, you'd have like a solid rock of camu.
I did love it though when you had that powder, because I would make it a little adrenal cocktail with that. You know, the recipes are all over the internet, but like with a little potassium or salt, and that flavor of the camu really helped. And then of course the vitamin C, you know, was enhancing the absorption.
We definitely miss the taste of it. I mean, now sometimes I'll just open up the caps and put them in my kid's smoothie or something like that. Same thing with star anise. It kind of tastes like licorice. It has a nice flavor. So both of those you can easily mix in juice or better a smoothie just to kind of get it in for children and whatnot to help keep them healthy.
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've never opened up the Elysium capsule, even though I knew it was anise. But yeah, that would be a nice flavor in a smoothie. Nice.
And I mean, it was funny. I was just talking to my dad the other day and he was like, oh, you should try, you know, cooking with it a bit more. Like, okay, Thanksgiving, mix some star anise in your pumpkin pie, or you can mix in a lot of things. And as long as you don't absolutely hate the licorice taste, it mixes in stuff really well.
Well, you look at Vietnamese food.
Yeah. So also it's getting to that cold time of year. If you look up a lot of pho recipes in Vietnam, they add star anise into the broth and it adds a really nice flavor. So we've made some like venison pho before and added a lot of star anise, and that was a really nice flavor.
That sounds great. Okay. So just to recap, so I'm on the same page, the camu for capsules for anybody, because that's just a really good source of vitamin C. And then Elysium, you're saying, is pretty benign. So whether you have autoimmune diseases or not, it's not going to push you either way. So that can be a good one to kind of keep in your routine. Or if you are going to be somewhere where you think you might be exposed to, you know, whatever is going around, that can be a good one. And then Dr. Michael, you were saying, and you also said Morinda, right? Can just kind of be a general one. And then you were saying that there's some that are better for people who are more autoimmune inclined. Now, which one was those?
Right. I personally, I mean, my favorite is Malia.
Malia, that's right.
Because that's very broad spectrum, antifungal, antibacterial, antiviral, antiparasitic. Golden thread, which is also called Coptis. Scutellaria is more gentle, but it does a really good job.
You know, when he mentioned about
Andrographis for one virus that gets a lot of airplay these days, Andrographis has been very helpful for a lot of people.
And one thing a lot of people have, I mean, this can be in anyone, but especially in more recent viral issues, a lot of people have thickened blood, let's say, and taking Danshen can be really good. It helps support the heart, dilates the vessels to increase blood flow to the heart, but it also, a lot of people, and they've had a lot of research with herpes, cytomegalovirus, and other viruses, a lot of people, because their blood gets a little bit thicker than it should, you don't get normal oxygen to different parts of the brain and smaller capillary beds. So it's actually kind of cool if you combine an antimicrobial herb with Danshen, it actually will help thin the blood, dilate the blood vessels, and so the herbs and oxygen and nutrients will get to those tiny capillary beds, and you'll get a lot more nutrients to some of those small areas that you aren't getting otherwise.
Okay, interesting. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that has been a recent problem that I've heard a lot about, the thickened blood. And then of course, I've heard about that in other instances, like when we have a biotoxin illness or Lyme disease, you can encounter those problems. I did want to ask you about, and this is not even something I mentioned before, what I learned about your Mimosa pudica product is that there's really kind of two mimosas on the market. There's the seed, and then there's like the whole herb. And can you describe a little bit from your perspective what the difference is? And then I'll tell you a funny story after that.
I mean, if you look, they both have different medicinal properties. You can read a lot about how they'll use the leaves and the stem for diarrhea and some other conditions like that traditionally. It's actually one of the coolest. It grows all around our property here in Hawaii. And if you touch it, the leaves close up on each other. They call it the shai plant. It's one of the funnest plants you'll ever see. But, the leaves, one of the big things is more of the help with diarrhea, but it has a lot of different benefits. They both are, you can make two different products with Mimosa that are both different and very good. When it comes to the seeds themselves, they're very mucilaginous. It's a very unique part about them. And, if you just actually open up a cup and mix it with water, it kind of looks like a bunch of snot in your cup, not to gross people out, but it does. And that's part of it. I mean, if you look at the research with Mimosa pudica, it has great anti-candida properties. It has great anti-parasitic properties. Traditionally, they use parts of it for hemorrhoids. So it has a lot of different great properties to it in terms of the components, but then also that mucilaginous complex, as it goes through your GI system, people think it can actually almost cover up and smother parasites and other different types of microbes and pull them out. So you kind of have the more biochemical benefits of the herb, which the research shows. Then you also have some physical components of the seeds that the rest of the plant doesn't have. And as it goes through, like I said, it kind of engulfs and pulls things through.
So do you guys consider Mimosa pudica, I mean, I know you mentioned it for parasites, but do you consider it a sort of binder at all? Or do you see it working more as strictly a parasitic, an anti-parasitic type of thing?
I mean, when it comes to herbs, they have so many different properties. Sometimes, I could list 10 different properties of why I might use one single herb. So it does have some binding properties, but if someone mentioned to me, what could I take as a binder? It definitely wouldn't immediately come to mind, but it definitely has some properties that make it act like that.
So the funny story I wanted to tell you was that I recently was learning about Mimosa pudica over the past couple of years. There's been a couple of websites that have been really pushing it and things like that. And so I was trying to explain to my staff what mucilaginous means and, how it works for parasites, Mimosa pudica seed, and how it's different than the straight herb. And so we did, as you instructed, we opened up a capsule and I put it in a glass of water. And of course, just soaks up all the water and then it looks like dirty snot. And I was showing them how it was stretchy and sticky and explaining to them, how it's going to grab onto stuff in the colon and clean things out. And so now in our office, we have a saying that's called jello colon. So I always, I always try to explain to anybody who's interested in Mimosa pudica and anybody I recommend it to that, this is going to make a really big, thick mess in your colon. And so you need to make sure and have enough water. And I think that that's the best way to show people how much water they need is by opening a capsule and putting it in there so that they understand it. And then of course it's a fun science experiment.
Definitely.
I mean, one thing with parasites, just since that's one of the more major uses for Mimosa, is personally, if I had to pick a favorite parasitic, it would probably be Vidanga. Okay. I think it performs, sometimes it performs better I think if people wanted to do some type of parasite cleanse or something, combining the two is probably ideal, because I think between the two, you'd cover most bases. But I
Okay.
know that as individuals, you would have to kind of know exactly which microbe you have and, so forth, as opposed to if you just wanted to cover both, most bases, just putting the two together would work the best.
And they both do kind of work. I mean, a lot of people talk about mimosa for some of the smaller parasitic infections. Well, smaller in size. Like
Right.
you see some pretty big things that people pass, but usually talk about the smaller in size. While the dengue, more people, and a lot of the research shows it helps with tapeworms, so more your helminth infections. So if you take both and you're kind of getting the larger and the smaller at the same time, and they can work together.
Okay. I love it that, about 90% of my discussions with professionals or with my clients always ends up in the toilet.
It's always fun when you get some pictures of parasites or different things that people
Yeah.
pass, and usually goes along with feeling a lot better. And those are always, fun pictures that you get texted.
That's rewarding, definitely rewarding. Okay, so Mimosa pudica and Badenga would probably be a good parasite combination, just kind of for someone who's just in general concerned about parasites. And what about binders? So of course I know that you have Takasumi, which is, in my opinion, and probably yours too, the best kind of full spectrum binder that's available. And really, when you guys started using that, I think you might have been the only people, or at least the only ones that I knew of, that were offering that high quality product. Tell me what brought that into your line, and what you guys use that for, and if you think there's any other binders that are complementary.
Okay, so I have two sons, Noah and Josiah. And Josiah was living in Japan, and he's kind of, he likes to watch anime. So he was watching some show about a bakery in Japan, and they were having a national contest on who could bake the healthiest bread. So the people in this show who won were making Takasumi bread.
Okay.
So he called me up and he said, "Hey, do you ever hear of Takasumi?" And I said, "No." I said, "Why don't you get me some?" So he got some, and we didn't know what to do with it. So we started baking with it. So we would add it to our bread. And besides that, the bread would be totally black in color. We found that as people who don't do very well on gluten, we actually didn't have the negative reaction when the Takasumi was in the bread. And we started, putting it in smoothies, and anything we fed if we had a guest over was black, pretty much. And but we were reading about it, and it was used in Indonesia when they were working with cancer patients. And they used it they actually took, you want to grab that? They actually took sticks of Takasumi and they put them in rooms to kind of, they say that I don't know if it does or not, but they say that it helps purify the air, and it also helps mitigate electromagnetic pollution. But so like we have one of these in our office, which are, Takasumi sticks.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but we found that I had been poisoned by mercury many years ago, and I had some, I had done many things, including some prescription chelators like DMSA and some others. And I had gotten so far and I plateaued, and I took Takasumi, and within like a month, it had taken me to a new level. And we started using it on patients. And we found that it was a pretty non-specific chelator of toxic things. So it would grab chemicals, it would grab metals, it will grab nutrients a little bit. So I wouldn't take it at the same time that I would take a vitamin. We usually tell people to take it 2 hours away from things, but it seemed to be a non-specific toxin binder. And it's pretty much what we use. I mean, maybe once a year, maybe we sell a bottle of pectin or something like that. But for the most part, Takasumi has done really good. We have it in two different forms. We have the powder and we have the capsules, and they're actually from two different sources. The powder comes from a rural place in southern Japan, way far away from, like Fukushima and all those things.
Yeah.
And we also have it tested for radiation. The one that we encapsulate comes from Korea.
South Korea.
Yeah. And they do, as you know, people who do energetic testing on our patients, they do tend to test differently sometimes. So you might prefer one over the other. I mean, the powder has no taste, and other than that, your glass becomes black. You know, I prefer it in a sense because you can get, you know, therapeutic dosages a little bit easier, but the capsules work well for people. In fact, once the powder was out first, once the capsules came out, we sell way more capsules than powder because most people would prefer to take capsules.
Yeah.
Really, that is the main binder. Like we do have another product, Smilax, which is sarsaparilla root. And I mean, that is an endotoxin and mycotoxin binder. I don't really look at it as a broad spectrum binder. And kind of an interesting and nice thing with Takasumi is, you know, some people are worried if they're taking a binder for long periods of time, if it's going to deplete their nutrient levels. And we've had multiple doctors email us and say, hey, we've had our patients on this for 1 or 2 years, and we run nutrient, you know, like a SpectraCell nutrient level test every 6 months, and it's never depleted their nutrient levels. And so, you know, we've had people, like I said, take it long term and not have an issue with that. And you know, like I mentioned, we've used, you know, a pectin on a very occasion. The clays out there we're very cautious with since, you know, we've looked into coming out with some, but when you look at the heavy metal reports on them, they're insanely high.
And
you
the
know,
highest is in most of those things is aluminum.
And that's why we haven't found any clays.
Clays, fulvic acid, humic acid, they're all high in those type of things.
Yeah, and that's a reason that we've stuck to Takasumi specifically. And even with Takasumi, I mean, there's a couple of bamboo charcoals, which are slightly different process from China. And the ones we've seen from there are generally higher in heavy metals. And so we've never used any of those, even though they're much cheaper. We just haven't been happy with the heavy metal reports on them.
Now, what is the difference then between bamboo charcoal and Takasumi?
Bamboo, it depends. The stuff we get in Japan is made from like this method they've been using for I don't know how many hundreds of years. And hopefully we'll be able to keep getting it because it's made from these 80-plus-year-old artisans that have kind of kept this traditional method for forever. You know, I'm not sure how the temperature varies, again, because we do basically clinical trials in the office. And I mean, Takasumi, just the name itself is equivalent to bamboo charcoal.
Right.
But, you know, the sources that we have, the source we have in Japan, I believe we're the only medicinal version of that. Most of the source, unfortunately, is bought up by the confectionery industry to color different candies black in Japan itself. That you won't get this here. So I think we're the only people who contract with them to use it medicinally.
Okay. Interesting.
I mean, they do, in some Japanese texts, they do talk about because of the porous nature of bamboo, it's about 10 times stronger as a binder than other forms of charcoal.
And another reason we prefer it, I mean, you know, some charcoal comes from minerals like coal that are fairly toxic, but also there was a study done in terms of coconut charcoal, because that's popular too. You know, when the US was doing experiments with nuclear radiation, and they would take some atoll in the Pacific and just start bombing it like Bikini Island, and, you know, to see what would happen. And they basically irradiated the whole island, and, you know, nothing, you know, could live there. They did studies, and they came back in to see, you know, what the radiation was so many years down the line, and there wasn't any. And they thought, wow, we're supposed to find all this radiation. And they wanted to know where it went. And they finally figured out that it went into the coconuts.
Okay.
Which makes me a little bit, if coconut is such a great radiation absorber, it would make me a little bit nervous to use coconut husk charcoal. But
yeah, that makes me a little nervous too.
And again, like Noah said, supposedly Takasumi is 10 times more absorbent just because of, the porousness of bamboo itself.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, anyone who has used charcoal capsules or had a different kind of charcoal and then used Takasumi, I mean, even the consistency and the apparent electrical charge in the powder itself is very different. So it's pretty evident that it's a different
Supposedly it gives off negative ions. I mean,
Yeah.
they use Takasumi in clothing, in different places, or they've made Takasumi infused blankets to like sleep under, and they use it for all kinds of things.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you for taking time today to go over some of your herbal products. They're not by any means they're not mixtures, as we were talking about. They're not really formulas. They are just those single whole food herbs. And of course, your Takasumi is one of my favorites. I keep it on hand all the time for many purposes. I know it's popular right now for people to take before they drink. I don't drink, but yeah, that is, if you search the interwebs, that is kind of a common biohack that people are recommending.
Actually, in the UK, they used to make spoons out of Takasumi that you would use to stir your coffee, and supposedly you wouldn't get the caffeine reaction.
Interesting.
Never tried it.
I mean, if anything, it was binding to the mycotoxins that might have been present in the coffee if the coffee was cheap. So
you'll have to try that. Make some spoons.
Yeah, you'll have to try it. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for taking time to, kind of go over what we can do. And, as individuals, not everyone can see you as a doctor. Not everyone can see me as a nutritionist. And so I think it's great to get some kind of DIY aspects and angles for people to do their self-care. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And as always, I'm so thrilled to work with you guys. It's been like probably close to 3 years since we all met at Expo West. Remember that nice sunny day? I missed that when we could travel freely and be in large masses. So thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time today, and I hope to talk to you guys soon.
Thanks for having us,
Thanks
Carly.
so much.
Bye-bye.